Hey there, kids and cadets. This is Tim from the FSF Podcast, and welcome to another edition of 5 at 5. So for today, I thought what we would do is we would talk about one of my favorite actors. It just happens to be Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks has been a generational actor who's played in so many different movies and a couple TV shows and all these different things. And he's transitioned into writing and directing and producing, and not just movies, but also music as well. He's got some fantastic things, and he's also one heck of a book narrator. So if you ever get a chance to listen to his book narration, I suggest you do it. But what I thought we would do today is, because there is so much Tom Hanks material out there, it's not really easy to make a top 5 list unless you kind of partition it down. And so that's what I'm doing today. We're going to talk about my favorite top 5 Tom Hanks movies that are based upon or inspired by true events. But before we get into the top 5, I have an honorable mention, because actually I had 6 movies, and you can't do a top 5 at 5 and have 6, but you can't have an honorable mention in there. So my honorable mention is a movie called Greyhound, which was released to Apple Plus. So if you have that subscription, you could watch it there. And it's actually a really good movie based on the Battle of the Atlantic, which was one of the most fierce and deadly wars during World War II, one of the naval battles. It's all about this naval commander who's leading an Allied convoy across the Atlantic. The whole time they're being pursued by German U-boats, submarines. And so it's his job to lead these across the Atlantic, but there's a pocket in the middle of the Atlantic where they were on their own. Basically, they were in radio silence. They didn't have radio connectivity to either side. And so that's where the U-boats would do most of their damage. And this takes you through one of those events. But like I said, loosely based on it's not an actual event. The Commander Krauss, who was the Allied Navy, never really existed. This evening never really happened, but it's inspired by other events and other true stories. So it's worth checking out if you have Apple Plus. So let's get at it. Now for a 5 at 5. So my number 5 is A League of Their Own. So I love this movie because during World War II, there was a lot of stuff going on in the United States. Most of the baseball players had been drafted into the war, and Major League Baseball took a pretty big hit. So what happened? Well, a couple people thought, let's figure out another way to entertain the masses of the United States with baseball. And they did it with some very, very talented women. And this movie goes through and shows how difficult it was to be taken seriously as a woman in that era playing baseball, the sexism that they went up against. They really sugarcoated it in the movie, but I'm sure it's much worse than anything we saw on the screen. It's a really motivating story. Tom Hanks plays Jimmy Dugan, a retired baseball manager who was an all-pro in baseball but had a bum leg, but he was a functional alcoholic, we'll call it. One of my favorite lines in that movie, and I'm sure you remember it, he's talking to somebody about, some play that didn't go wrong out in the field, and the woman starts crying, and he just looks at her, and there's no crying in baseball. Anyway, I love that. So anyway, League of Their Own, amazing movie. Please go watch it. If you're not familiar with the story of the Women's Baseball League during World War II, watch the movie, get a good baseline about it, and then go Google it. Find out about it. It's a pretty interesting story with some really cool background. All right, number 4, Catch Me If You Can. Tom Hanks plays Carl Hanratty, who's a FBI agent in pursuit of a young man played by Leonardo DiCaprio. And his name is Frank Abagnale Jr. And he somehow turns into a master forger. This kid is just from early on figured out how to pull the wool over people's eyes and move through life, and he's able to starts off as a French teacher. Then he goes on and he's becomes a pilot without ever becoming a pilot. He's forging checks from Pan American Airlines. He's doing all these different things, and he ends up working for the FBI in the end, and really setting the tone for checking security and bank fraud implementations and all these different things that we see as commonplace today are the result of Frank Abagnale's work with the FBI. But it's a really great story, some pretty funny parts in there, and some pretty serious parts too. But Catch Me If You Can is number 4. Number 3, Saving Mr. Banks. I didn't expect to like this movie because I don't like Mary Poppins. Never have liked Mary Poppins, probably never will like Mary Poppins. But I like Tom Hanks, and so I watched it because it has Tom Hanks, and it has a few other actors and actresses in the movie that I like as well. It's really well cast. But Tom Hanks plays Walt Disney in this movie, and he is working on acquiring Mary Poppins from P.L. Travers, who is the original author of the story of Mary Poppins. And it goes through all the difficulties that they had of coming to an agreement of releasing Mary Poppins because, Disney wanted to, Disney it up. And it was very different from what P.L. Travers had written and what she had envisioned as who and what Mary Poppins was. It's a really well done movie. There are parts that pull at your heartstrings, and your eyes get a little moist in a few spots. There's parts where you will laugh, and there's a couple of parts where they're trying to show her what they're going to do, how they're going to Disney it up, where things get a little funny and you get these little earworms stuck in your head. Not enough to make you go watch Mary Poppins, I think, but all the same, it's pretty well done. So Saving Mr. Banks is number 3. Number 2, Bridge of Spies. This is another post-World War II era movie. It's set during the Cold War era. Tom Hanks plays a lawyer named James B. Donovan, who somehow gets convinced to represent a Russian spy against the United States government. And how it just kind of snowballs from there. And then there's a young man, Gary Powers, gets shot down, American spy plane over Russia, and the whole how that all works and how he bargains for Gary Powers to get released. And another young man who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time in East Germany. And somehow he arranges it so they can both be released on this bridge, in a neutral spot during the Cold War. And that's why it's called Bridge of Spies. It's an amazing movie. Very well done. Again, very well cast. There's a lot of people in this movie where you see them and you go, oh yeah, I remember that guy. You may not know their name, but you're like, I saw this guy in that movie, and he was in that movie, and this person was in that movie and that thing. But very well cast, very well done, wonderfully told story. So number 2, Bridge of Spies. And number 1, The Big Enchilada. Number 1 is a movie that, if you thought that since I said, hey, we're going to talk about movies that were based on or inspired by true events, you were probably expecting this one to be number 1. If you didn't, why not? It's Saving Private Ryan. Captain Miller, that's Tom Hanks' character, leads a band of U.S. troops that's sent behind enemy lines to retrieve a paratrooper whose other brothers had already been killed in action. And so they're sent in to retrieve him so that his parents wouldn't have a total loss of all their children during World War II. And it's also set during the Battle of Normandy, which is one of the biggest and bloodiest battles during World War II. Very accurately done, very accurately told. From what I know, of course, I'm reading books and history books and things like that. Clearly, I was not there. It's a really well done movie. Again, amazing cast. This probably has one of the biggest casts of any movie that's out there. It's almost like with Marvel now, they have this actor, all these great actors doing it's almost like in a Marvel's Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame, where everybody's in the movie. It's like you name somebody, they're in Saving Private Ryan. If they were popular at the time this movie came out, they're in Saving Private Ryan. But it's an amazing story, very well told, and it's a story that happened several times throughout World War II, where they were sent in to retrieve particular troopers to make sure that their family line could continue. So anyway, that's the top 5. So just in a brief review, our honorable mention is the movie Greyhound on Apple Plus. Apple TV Plus. Go check it out there. And then we have League of Their Own at number 5. Catch Me If You Can at number 4. Number 3 is Saving Mr. Banks. Number 2 is Bridge of Spies. And number 1 is Saving Private Ryan. That's my top 5 based on or inspired by true events stories with Tom Hanks. So if you haven't already, hopefully we can convince you to click the like and subscribe button. There's a little animation popping up on the screen right there. Our producer John will put it there for you to remind you that your subscription helps us to continue to grow and to be able to put out more amazing content for you each and every week. Not only with our 5 at 5s, our live shows Monday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern every Monday night, and every Friday morning, a release of a pre-recorded interview with somebody in our pop culture or sci-fi world, somebody that you want to hear that's out there doing the things. Anyway, that's our 5 at 5 for today. Thanks, guys. Have a good one, and bye-bye.